Hello, welcome to FM Live. My name is Mike Usrey, and today I'm going to be talking about wheel studs, specifically longer than normal wheel studs. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a deep dive into something that is not going to affect a whole bunch of people, but we do get a lot of questions about them. So, wanted to talk about wheel studs, why you might want them, why you might not want them, what do they even do, all of this kind of stuff and more. So hopefully, if this is something you've been curious about, you'll learn something in this video. I will go through and talk about some of the questions we have had in advance throughout this video, but if you have more questions, please feel free to drop those down in the comments below, and I'll try to get to them as we go through this video. Of course, if you are asking questions on YouTube, thank you very much. We'll answer those even in the future after this video has been uploaded. So feel free to drop down those questions and comments down below, of course, even then. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So, wheel studs. What the heck are we talking about? Well, I'm not just talking about, you know, the obvious elephant in the room here. Yes, I'm standing right here, but no, I'm talking about these studs. So these are wheel studs. These go in the hub of your car. They're at what actually keeps your wheels attached to your car. Behind me here, we actually conveniently have a car with this wheel pulled off, and you can see these studs pulling out or poking out here. This car actually has extended length wheel studs already on it, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But basically, these threaded bolts that are poking through your brake rotor, that's what keeps your wheels on. Those are your wheel studs. So obviously they're important. You have to have them in order to have your wheels bolted on, unless you're one of those goofy like 70s Dodges or Volkswagens and Porsches and stuff that use wheel bolts. We're not even going to talk about that at the moment. Um, my condolences to everyone who has to deal with those. Fortunately, Miatas all came with wheel studs, so they're something that's on the car. You don't really have to worry about how you place the wheel for the most part. It makes it much easier than wheel studs. So these studs, they're just fancy bolts. The only thing that really makes them different from a normal bolt is that they have what's called a knurl down here at the bottom. That's all these little splines that are kind of at the base or the neck portion of the bolt. They also don't have a hex or generally don't have any kind of feature on the head. The head is completely round normally. There are some studs that you'll come across that they have a flat cut on one side, and usually that's for clearance um, on the back side of the hub. This is a fancy aftermarket one we'll talk more about in a little bit, but sometimes you'll have a flat cut down that faces basically the inside of the hub for a little bit of clearance. They're the same thing. It's functionally identical, but it's a fancy bolt. That's all it is. So this is actually pressed into the hub from the back side, and it allows you to put your brakes on, put your wheel on, and then thread on your lug nut to keep everything clamped and on the car, so that way you can drive down the road like normal. Pretty straightforward. So extended lug nuts, or extended wheel studs, just like what the name would imply, it is a wheel stud that is longer than a normal stock stud. Now, I've got a few different examples that we'll talk about each one in turn, but essentially, this is all it is. It's a wheel stud that is longer. And why would you want a longer wheel stud? Why is this an important thing that some people may want? Well, there's a number of reasons you may want to go with an extended wheel stud. For the very basic reason of, say, you went to a shop or you let your buddy work on your car, and buddy doesn't know how to operate torque wrench, and he just used the impact gun, and he just tried to zip on your lug nuts super fast, and he got them cross-threaded. Well, now that stud's probably goobered, and you need to replace it. You can either replace it with a factory one or factory size one. These are available still. Or at that point, you may say, well, I may want to upgrade to an extended wheel stud. It's an option. So sometimes just general replacement is what a lot of people are going for. Sometimes they don't need it. Again, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But also, the other instance that a lot of people may want a longer wheel stud is usually because they want to run some super thick, beefy spacers. Now, on these cars, Miatas, again, we can run a few millimeters worth of spacer on the stock wheel stud, and you're not going to run out of room too soon. What do I mean by run out of room? Well, I don't have a brake on here to show you all of how it works, but everybody knows how a wheel spacer works, right? Goes over the hub like this. Actually, hey, I have a car behind me. Let's do that. So, put the spacer on here. There we go. And this way, it's pushing your wheel out. I think this is a 5mm spacer, if I recall. It pushes your wheel out just a little ways. You might need that because you've got a big brake kit and your wheels have really tight fitment. So you may need to push that wheel out to gain some more clearance. On a stock stud that's sticking out here, obviously you have less thread that's exposed. So if you try to install a really thick spacer on a stud that is this short, the amount of thread that pokes through gets shorter and shorter, right? That's pretty obvious. The problem is that when you go to put your wheel on and you need to tighten down your lug nut, you may only get a few turns of that lug nut before it actually is tightening against the wheel and you can't tighten it anymore. And at that point, there's not a whole bunch of thread engagement. And that's a pretty terrible idea for really even street driving, but especially track or anything where you're aggressively going around corners. Because that thread engagement, that's where your strength is. Your strength is actually the lug nuts grabbing onto these threads. So if you don't have enough thread engagement, you could rip your lug nuts off, your wheel goes flying off, you go sliding into a corner, things catch on fire, it's a bad day. I don't recommend it. So if you're running a really thick wheel spacer because you need more clearance for your brakes, or maybe you just like a super wide look, then you may need to go with with an extended length stud to be able to give you enough thread to poke through and still have room for your thread engagement with your lug nut. So let's back up and talk about Miata specific application for this. In our experience with a stock wheel stud, this is, or at least the threaded section that pokes out of the wheel, basically past the hub, about an inch, maybe, well, here, let me scoot it up. Your hub is going to be right about here, basically right where these threads start. So you have roughly an inch worth of threads that are sticking out and exposed. So we know that when it's on the car and you have your brakes on and you're about to put your wheels on, you can use a 3mm spacer just fine. You can use actually up to about a 5mm spacer asterisk, as long as you're not pushing it super hard and still have enough thread engagement for NAs and Bs and Cs and Ds. They all actually have the same length stud. Fun fact. So at that point, your lug nut does have enough thread engagement to be able to hold the wheel on there and still be safe. How much is enough thread engagement? Good question. So generally speaking, the accepted knowledge for how much thread engagement is necessary, it will vary because it depends on what kind of thread pitch you have. Miatas use an M12 by 1.5 thread pitch. Again, all Miatas use that same thread pitch. So in this particular case, the general rule of thumb that I usually go by, because it's easier than remembering how many turns or any of the other kind of methods like that, is that this diameter, it's 12mm, right? Because it's an M12. If you take that times 1.5, basically, is how much depth of thread engagement that you should have with your lug nut. And that is a safe number. So in this case, that would be, 18mm worth of depth where your lug nut needs to be able to have that much thread engagement. If you have right at 18mm or less thread engagement, you are getting on the hairy side of having not enough. So if you are running a big wide spacer or don't know where you are, if you're running stock wheels, stock lug nuts, stock, that kind of stuff, you're fine. But FYI, that is a general rule of thumb. There are calculators out there if you're curious and want to really dive in for what thread pitch you have and how large the diameter is, that gives you a safe estimate of how much clamping force you can achieve. I won't cover that in this video. But you may need that so that way you can have enough thread engagement for your lug nuts with spacers. That's one of the common reasons that oftentimes you'll need to have a extended length stud. Another thing that's probably the more common thing that we talk to folks about is that if you're planning on racing, you might want extended length studs. This is a particular reason for usually the metallurgy and also the kind of coating that is applied to these wheel studs. The stock studs are they're very strong actually for what they are. They are a mild steel alloy that has some kind of coating on it. I'm actually not exactly sure what Mazda use. You can kind of see it's got this bluish green tint to it. Might be an anodization or some kind of a zinc coating. I'm not entirely sure, but it's pretty corrosion resistant. It is a good stud for what it is. But a lot of aftermarket studs, like this one from ARP, it is a actually, here, I've got the specs right here. It's a heat-treated 8740 chromoly steel. And it's got a high tensile strength of like 200,000 PSI. The thing that I think a lot of people appreciate as well is that it is a cadmium-plated bolt or fastener. So that way you can thread on your lug nuts over and over and over. And they will eventually start to wear out this coating, but it takes an awful long time. It's a very strong and durable coating. But the main benefit for racers is that because it is a very high quality and very specifically heat treated bolt, this can withstand a lot of abuse. And over time, torquing down your lug nuts on and off, on and off. If you're at the track, you're pulling your wheels off to check your brakes, you're swapping out wheels and tires for, different kinds of driving, whatever. You're going to be putting a lot of load on these threads. And again, it's clamping force. So that lug nut is going to be pulling against the threads, and it's over time going to start deforming the threads, or at least it would be more likely to deform threads that are weaker. So a stronger wheel stud like ARP is a good way to ensure that these threads stay nice and triangular or pointy for as long as possible. That way, as you're taking wheels on and off, you don't have to worry about, am I going to strip a stud off? Am I going to ruin my track day? Whatever. So that's probably the most common reason, besides I want to run a lot of wheel spacer, that we talk to folks because they're racing the car. They're going to be doing a lot of performance driving. They're swapping wheels and tires all the time. Those threads are seeing a lot of action. So having that extra durability is a good thing. Let's see. The other thing, and this is an edge case. You could argue that because compared to a stock stud, you have more thread. As long as you had a lug nut that had more threads in it, you would technically have a stronger clamping force or a higher ability for more clamping force because you have more threads available. Miatas don't really struggle with that. And generally speaking, like, unless you're running super duper really wide wheels and tires, that again probably doesn't really make any difference to you, but edge case, they're technically stronger if you have more thread engagement. Okay, let's talk about the different options of wheel studs, because I do have quite a few here in front of me. I've already mentioned the ARP. They are kind of the gold standard, pun intended, for wheel studs. They have been around for a long time. They're very high quality. Pretty much everybody knows ARP as a brand name. Um, Other than that, we do also offer this wheel stud. So this is a wheel stud that is not quite as exotic. It is a class 10.9 wheel stud. It has a black oxide coating. So it's not the same kind of material as this guy. I don't think that the tensile strength is quite as strong as the ARPs, but this is actually the same stud that is used in a lot of spec racing and other performance, Miata specifically, motorsports applications, and outside of Miatas too, for what it's worth. They are a very strong stud, and they're about 2/3 the price of the ARP studs. So, um, especially if you're somebody who has a preference of, I don't want my wheel studs to be shiny and, sticking out, that might be an option. The other thing to note here, actually, let's do apples to apples test here. Hopefully I can hold them straight enough and upright enough. They are slightly different lengths overall. So this one, of course, you can see the thread starts a little bit lower down, but that's still going to be in the hub just a little bit. There's still, what's exposed outside the hub is still going to be about there. So overall, the ARP does have, well, here, I don't need an ichrometer. I have a measuring stick. That's what, here. We'll do metric to mix it up here. It looks like about 8 millimeters. Yeah, about 8 millimeters difference as far as like how much thread engagement you're getting for, uh, for the freedom lovers in the house. We're gonna do, that looks like about 5/16. Yeah, about 5/16 of an inch difference in thread. So there is a difference there as far as how much engagement you can have. This will make a difference for if you're really pushing it, like maybe you're running a Mondo wheel spacer and you need all the thread you can get. Well, maybe that'll make the decision for you. But, if you're not looking for anything too crazy, you could do one of these wheel studs and save you a few dollars, especially if you're not racing for money. It's a pretty good bargain. Besides that, another option that's on the market right now is Mazda Motorsports. So that you can see that this is a full hub, of course. It is a custom billet machined hub. Very sexy piece. They actually utilize studs from MSI. And these are very similar to the ARP and even these other slightly less exotic black wheel studs. Very strong. They are about the same length overall, maybe a little bit longer, actually, even than the ARPs. So again, if you maybe if you're looking for super spacer wheel offset, maybe this is a better option for you. But it's the same kind of concept. Mazda Motorsports knows that if you're going to be tracking the car, which is kind of the intent of their hub, is that you're going to need longer wheel studs. So that way, one, it'll be easier for you to get the wheels on and off, but also two, they are high tensile strength studs. They can withstand more torquing on and off to be able to get your wheels swapped or whatever you're doing. Let's see. Oh, the one thing I didn't mention about why you might want stock studs versus these extended length studs, oftentimes they are available in this style, which is called a bullnose style stud. My apologies for not mentioning this earlier. But this is basically an unthreaded portion at the very top. It's rounded, and that's because if you were to take lug nuts and try to get them started, you can see that before I even thread it on there, I can contact this and pretty much rotate it all the way around. So if you had this on an impact gun and you're trying to get it on there, you could easily cross thread your lug nut onto a stock stud or any kind of stud that is basically threaded the full length pretty easily, because there's a pretty wide range of motion before you actually engage the thread properly. On a bullnose stud, because it does have that kind of rounded tip, I'm going to push it just lightly until I contact the threads. I only have just a little bit of wiggle room there. I can't rotate it around. So if you were to use an impact gun to whip this on and off, you pretty much are almost guaranteed that that's going to engage and start threading on there properly rather than cross threading and messing up your day, basically costing you a track day or whatever else. If nothing else, just having a bad time and needing to replace studs. So, for a lot of people, if you'd use impact tools, that is a really handy feature, having the bullnose studs. All right. Okay. So installation. Another question we get a lot is how do we install studs? Obviously, you can't see them from the front side. And if we have this hub off of here, you'd have to take the brakes off. You have to take, a lot of times you want to take the actual knuckle off of the car for the best access. But you do need to get access to the back sides of the studs. And here I'll kind of show you the back side of this Mazda Motorsports one, because again, they are pressed through from the back. Now, there are lots of ways that you could potentially press studs in. A lot of them aren't very good, or at least they have a high potential for causing damage. The best way to do it is to take your new stud, take your hub, we'll pretend this is it. You take it over the press and you actually press it in from the backside using a hydraulic press, or if you have kind of a claw style installation tool, whatever, that's fine. But basically applying pressure from the head down into your hub is the appropriate and most accurate way to press your studs in. The problem is that it's more time consuming to take your knuckle off, all that kind of stuff. So what a lot of people will prefer to do for time savings is actually take the old studs, take a mallet, knock them out of there, whatever you got to do, and then they'll put the new stud through from the back. Then they'll put an open-ended lug nut on it like this. Then they'll take their impact tool and just whiz it down until it basically pulls that stud through and seats the knurl into the hub. Now, that will work. The problem with that when you're pulling it is that it may not actually pull through completely perpendicular. You may end up with a situation where your stud, when you pull it through like that, because you're holding your impact gun a certain way, it may actually be slightly less than perpendicular. The problem with that is that when you go on, put on your wheel spacers, your brake rotors, your wheels, whatever, you try to line up your studs with whatever you're installing, and one of your studs, or maybe multiple of your studs, are kind of looking a little bit cross-eyed. And so getting your wheels, your spacers on is difficult because they aren't parallel to each other. So that object, that wheel, that brake rotor, whatever you're sliding on there, is going to fight you. So I always recommend, even if you have to take the knuckle off the car to put it on a press, that is a much better way to do it. The other thing that's dangerous about using the impact method is that, again, you're relying on the strength of your threads. So if you have a hub where that bore is dirty or something like that, and you try to pull it through, your threads may actually get so much stress on them from the lug nuts that you mess up your threads trying to pull the stud through. So it's a riskier action rather than using a press or a claw style to push it through the backside. I see we have a question. What is your question?
Can I whack the studs in with a hammer?
Oh, hey, excellent. So speaking of installation methods, can I whack the studs in with a hammer? You can. I don't recommend it. For basically the same reason as pulling the studs through, using a hammer or a mallet to try to install the studs, even if you have access to the backside of your hub, you're not going to be able to apply that force directly straight down like you would with a press or a claw style tool that's pulling it through, or I guess pushing it through rather. So using a mallet or a hammer, yes, you can. The likelihood of you getting it through and getting it perpendicular to the hub, a little bit less so. I would use it as I only have this option available to me kind of instance. Otherwise, try to find a press. Good question, though. Hey, I've been chatting a lot. Do we have any other questions I should answer? I've answered them all already. And Corey's probably given me lots of compliments. Thanks, buddy. Yeah. This is a very studly video, if you couldn't tell. All right. So what have I not talked about? Oh, here's a good one. Another one we got beforehand. Question about the splines. So I kind of touched on this earlier. These splines, they are what actually holds the stud in place in the hub. And they're all parallel to the length of the bolt for a reason, because when they get pulled into your hub and then you use a lug nut to tighten down, they are what's also resisting the whole stud from twisting within the hub. So they're what keeps the stud in place, and it keeps it from rotating. So the question about this spline, though, is that, such as with the ARP studs or even with stock studs, if you were to press these into a hub and then say something happened, you got in a wreck, whatever, and the hub was just mangled, but somehow your stud happened to be okay, can you remove the stud and then reuse it in another hub? Because, let's face it, this is you buy 16 of these or 20 of these for your car. That can get a little bit expensive. So if you can save them, yeah, sure. So is the question, though, are these splines something that can be reused? Generally speaking, yes. And the reason being for a lot of hubs, even hubs like this that are billet, is that the hub itself, whether it be billet aluminum or I think it's a mild steel hub on the stock setup, it's actually a softer material than your studs. So when you press the studs in, it's actually the hub that's deforming around your splines rather than the splines deforming around your hub, generally. If you've got a stud that's maybe been abused a little bit, or it's been whacked accidentally and it came out, and then you try to pull it back through and it's not seated properly, you can damage the splines. Yeah. But generally speaking, these are a hardened steel, and it's a heat treatment that is going to make these splines a bit more durable than the hub that they're being pressed into. So if you happen across that you want to reuse your studs, sure, try pressing them out. Take a look. If it's pretty obvious that the splines are still very straight, very sharp, like this one, this is a brand new one. Even if they got a little bit of schmeg in there, brush it out. As long as it looks okay and they've got nice sharp tops or crowns to them, yeah, reuse them for sure. No problem there. Lug nuts. Let's talk about lug nuts. So, been holding up a couple of lug nuts as I've been chatting. The reason that we need to talk about lug nuts is because that thread engagement that I was talking about earlier. Stock studs are designed to have stock wheels, stock lug nuts, so that way when you thread them on there, everything's tight and it's a compact solution. Mazda has obviously done the math. They know what to, set their wheel studs for, to work with their wheels and all of that. The problem though is that when you install a longer stud and your lug nuts that, unlike this one, they have usually kind of an acorn style shape on the top. If you were to start threading them on there, you keep going, the stud's starting to poke through. Well, what happens if you had a lug nut like the stock ones that are domed, they don't have an opening on the backside? Well, your wheel may be here and your lug nut isn't actually able to tighten up against the wheel. So a lot of times with these extended length studs, you will need to go to an open-ended lug nut. So there are some options out there that, even some factory style lug nuts that you can get from auto parts stores and elsewhere. Other makes and models also have lug nuts that are like this. They're of course going to be a heavy steel lug nut, but there are options out there such as ours that are an open-ended lug nut. So that way you can install these on your extended wheel studs and you can thread it down as far as you need to, doesn't matter. And even if it pokes out at the top, that's okay because you're still able to get that clamping force on your wheel to be able to hold it in place. So keep that in mind. If you are going to be using extended length wheel studs, you may need to pick up some open-ended lug nuts. All right. Well, I think that might be all of the stuff I had planned to talk about in advance. So, do you have any questions that popped up that I haven't talked about? Scrolling, we're scrolling. Thanks for all the comments, by the way. I appreciate it.
No.
Okay, I've covered them. Excellent. So, hopefully, this little extended wheel stud 101 course has been helpful. Hopefully, it's something that if you had questions about it before, that this answers more information about, why you might want it, why you might not want it. For instance, why not is like if you have the original Daisy wheels, these won't fit underneath the plastic caps. Ask us how we know. So, if you have particulars like that, you may not want to go with extended wheel studs, but especially if you're racing, if you're using big wide wheel spacers, then you may want to go with those extended length studs. That way you've got more room, more clamping force, more durability. So, thanks again for watching. I certainly appreciate it. If this is the kind of content you like, if you learned something, give us a like. Also, if you want to see more of this, you can subscribe. So that way, next time Thursday at 2 o'clock Mountain Time, we try to do videos every week. And next week, we'll have another video talking about some other Miata topic. And hopefully, you can join us then too. But until then, I really appreciate your time. My name is Mike. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.